Have you ever had a neighbor steal your water? Well, the main character in this story decided enough was enough and came up with the perfect revenge plan to teach their entitled neighbor a lesson she wouldn't forget. It all took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood where most people kept to themselves except one woman. She was a prominent member of the local Homeowners Association, HOA, and she believed the rules didn't apply to her. She was your typical Karen, demanding, condescending, and absolutely convinced the world owed her something. The story centers around a calm, rational homeowner who simply wanted to enjoy peace and privacy. But when his garden hose kept getting mysteriously moved and his water bills started to climb, he got suspicious. That's when he discovered that his next-door neighbor, Karen, had been helping herself to his hose to water her plants without asking. When he politely confronted her, she brushed him off with an entitled smirk, claiming it was just water and not a big deal. But instead of arguing, he decided to outsmart her. What came next was a brilliantly petty move that had the whole internet cheering and left Karen regretting ever touching that hose. In a well-manicured suburban neighborhood governed by a strict HOA, everyone knew the rules and, for the most part, respected them. Lawns were neatly trimmed, garbage bins were hidden from sight, and even the color of mailboxes had to adhere to specific guidelines. It was the kind of place where order and uniformity reigned supreme. At the heart of this carefully curated community was Karen, a woman who had somehow positioned herself as the unofficial enforcer of HOA rules. Despite not being on the HOA board officially, she had a loud voice and an even louder sense of entitlement. Everyone knew her, and most tried to stay out of her way. She would patrol the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, reporting minor infractions and nitpicking over petty details. The HOA tolerated her because she was relentless and had somehow convinced a few influential members that she had the neighborhood's best interest at heart. But what no one expected was that behind the HOA badge of righteousness, Karen felt above the very rules she loved to impose on others. Our main character had moved into the neighborhood a few years ago, preferring a quiet life. A calm, polite person by nature, he kept his yard clean, paid his dues on time, and stayed out of neighborhood drama. But all of that began to change when he noticed something strange. His water bill started creeping up. At first, he thought it might be a leaking pipe or faulty plumbing. He checked everything inside and out but couldn't find anything out of place. The mystery deepened until one morning, while doing routine yard work, he noticed that his garden hose was not where he had left it. The nozzle was wet, the hose slightly uncoiled. It seemed odd, but he shrugged it off. Maybe he had forgotten to put it back properly the last time he used it. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, the hose was left slightly differently than he remembered. His suspicion grew, so he decided to take action, not by confronting anyone immediately, but by installing a small, discreet security camera near the side of his house. What he captured left no room for doubt. Karen, HOA's self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, was walking into his yard in broad daylight, uncoiling the hose, and watering her own plants across the property line. No attempt at subtlety. No shame. Just pure audacity. She acted as if the hose was hers by default, occasionally even dragging it across his flower beds as if it were an extension of her own backyard. Furious but composed, he decided to talk to her the next day. He walked over, video evidence in hand, and calmly asked her to stop using his water. He explained that his bills had increased and that it was private property. Karen, in typical Karen fashion, scoffed. "It's just water," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You have plenty, and it's not like you're using it all. Why are you being so stingy? We live in a community. We're supposed to share." She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the trespassing. Instead, she doubled down, implying that he was the unreasonable one for even bringing it up. And then came the clincher: "If you don't want people using your hose, maybe you should lock it up. But until then, I'll use it when I need to. My plants are dying." She turned and walked away like she had won some moral argument. That's when the main character realized logic wouldn't work on Karen. Kindness and reason had failed. She felt entitled to his property, and unless something dramatic happened, she would continue her little water theft operation. So he began to think. He didn't want a physical confrontation or a legal battle. He wanted something simple, effective, and poetic. That's when the idea hit him: if she insisted on using his hose, then he'd let her, but he'd make sure it gave her exactly what she deserved. He got to work over the weekend. Carefully, discreetly, he rerouted the hose connection from his normal water outlet to a large, sealed tank he used for collecting greywater and other waste runoff. It wasn't technically sewage, he wasn't about to risk any health violations, but it smelled bad enough and looked unpleasant enough to make a point. He made sure everything was set up in a way that still looked like a normal garden hose setup from the outside. To any unsuspecting neighbor or one who felt entitled enough to use another person's water, it would look like business as usual. Sure enough, the next morning, his camera caught her in action again. Karen marched over in her usual way, yanked the hose across the lawn, and turned the nozzle on full blast onto her flower beds. Only this time, instead of a clean stream of water, she was greeted by a brown, murky liquid that gave off a putrid odor. It sprayed onto her plants, soaked her shoes, and even splashed back onto her white gardening gloves. Her expression changed almost instantly, from smug satisfaction to utter horror. She dropped the hose and let out a shriek that echoed across the block. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. A few stepped onto their porches to see what the commotion was. Karen, now splattered with greywater and embarrassment, stormed back to her house, fuming. Later that day, the HOA president came knocking on the main character's door, asking for an explanation. Karen had filed a complaint, claiming that he had intentionally sabotaged the neighborhood environment and created an unsafe situation. But when the main character calmly explained the setup and showed the footage of Karen trespassing multiple times, without permission, the tables turned. The HOA president was clearly uncomfortable. While Karen was a nuisance, she had never been caught red-handed like this before. There were no rules that prohibited a resident from connecting their hose to a private greywater tank. And more importantly, the HOA had no jurisdiction over how someone used their water supply, especially when the person complaining had been caught using it without consent. The police were even called, but once the full story came out, including the video evidence, they politely informed Karen that she was trespassing and had no legal grounds for a complaint. In fact, they gently suggested she consider herself lucky that the homeowner hadn't pressed charges for repeated unauthorized use of property. Karen didn't take the humiliation well. For weeks, she avoided eye contact with neighbors. She stopped walking around the neighborhood as frequently and seemed to lose her influence in HOA matters. Her yard, once pristine, began to look neglected, possibly out of shame or fear of another encounter. And the main character? He became something of a quiet legend in the community. Though he never bragged, word spread quickly. Neighbors began referring to the incident with amused nicknames like the Hose Wars or Karen's Comeuppance. One even created a meme that made it to the front page of Reddit's Entitled People subreddit, where thousands of users cheered him on as a hero of petty justice. What made the whole situation so satisfying wasn't just the revenge, it was the precision and restraint behind it. He hadn't yelled, threatened, or caused lasting damage. He had simply turned Karen's entitlement against her, using her own assumptions and arrogance as the tool of her downfall. The internet loved it. Comments poured in applauding his creativity, patience, and poetic justice. Some suggested awards. Others shared similar stories of entitled neighbors, inspired by his calm yet savage approach. And from that day forward, no one in the neighborhood ever touched his hose again.